And welcome back to We Got Options with the Doctor and Son. Today, I am Dr. Latasha McElwain, and I have Tremaine Green, the son, with me. And we are talking about trauma today and understanding what trauma is and kind of how it occurs and all this good stuff and what's considered trauma. And basically, we're just going to have a conversation about it because, again, as usual, I'm always doing research. I did some research on the introduction and an overview of trauma and really wanted to put it out there because I think for the most part, a lot of times we don't understand as people, typically, we don't understand that everyone's trauma is different and everyone may deal with some level of trauma. It could be trauma to me, but Tremaine, to you, you will say, that wasn't really traumatic to me, And sometimes that could be for many reasons. That could be for cultural reasons, that could be for gender reasons, that could be just the fact that males don't experience that females do experience it. You know what I mean? So it could be for a lot of reasons. It could be for the fact that, community wise or family belief wise, we never dealt with those things. So this was a shock to me when I saw it versus someone else being, oh, that's just something we do every day. That's something we hear and we deal with that on a regular basis. We go outside and that you know what I mean? So
hmm
I say that to say, I'm gonna give you an example of something that I would say was traumatic for me that other people would say, girl, okay, I grew up in a really cool family for the most part when it comes down to certain things. So, and my family was very protective in different ways of what they protected you from. They were very quiet, don't get me wrong. A lot of things were silent, and that's, a lot in different cultures and different, families. A lot of things are silent, or quote unquote unspoken. But I remember hearing a lot about guns growing up, right? Now, I would see guns at my grandfather's house, but they would be like almost like show guns. So that would be his, his gun that's in the back of his truck that's hanging up or whatever. And they went hunting, so they had deer heads on the wall and stuff like that. But all this stuff was, for show, as I thought. I didn't ever think that the gun that was in the back of my grandfather's truck was ever loaded. Probably was, but I didn't know that. But I would say that's on my mother's side, it was interesting that guns on that side, that wasn't something that I was ever exposed to. So when we moved and I was a little girl, we moved. And when we moved into the projects. And when we moved into the projects, I heard people talk about guns all the time, but I never seen a gun. And I'm not going to lie to you. The first time I saw a gun, it was traumatic for me. It scared everything out of me. I was like a blue ghost or something. Yeah, it scared me. And it was traumatic because when I saw it, I didn't see it where it was a situation that was getting ready to happen and it just scared the bejesus out of me. So for me, I would consider that to be a traumatic experience. However, on the other end, I will say this, Tremaine, you and Michael grew up in a house where mom and dad was in law enforcement. If you saw a gun today or any time during that time, you were like, oh, okay, yeah, mom got one back in the room. It's locked up somewhere, but she's got one, right?
Um, I mean, well, let me put it off. Let me. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't be affected by that because I mean, when you said something about the pop off, I'm like, oh, somebody about to use that thing. And
I get,
I
but
mean,
in the
I mean,
scenario I was in, nothing really popped off. It's just what it scared me.
yeah, that you saw that something could pop off.
Right. It wasn't even that anything popped off. It was just that I was just shocked to see a gun. But
You were shocked to see it.
I mean, I was. I
I
didn't
guess,
think.
I guess, I guess. In terms of like, what were you in college?
No, I was a
High
young
school?
girl. I was in high school, maybe. I think I was in high school or middle school or something like that. I can't remember which
Like,
one.
where were you over somebody's house?
Yeah, I was out, out and about playing. So seeing that gun scared me because, I've always heard of
Yeah,
what.
someone else's types of gun, I guess.
Right, yeah, and I know my grandparents went, my grandfather went, my uncles and all them, they went, out hunting and shooting, but I never saw a gun that someone is actually saying could be used on a person. So
Yeah.
that's what I thought. I think that's what scared me and caused that level of, traumatic response for me. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, but then, like I said, if it was one of my children, you would be like, "Oh, that's just a gun." If you saw somebody with a gun, because
I mean,
you know what
I
I'm
don't
saying?
think
Depending on what the scenario is. But yeah,
I was like, I mean, it's not like I was about to say it's not like that. I mean, I'm sure I don't want the trauma, but the trauma can get me.
I
I'll
understand.
say it like that.
But I'm just saying, for me, it was just the sight of a gun that scared me. And everything went running in my head, is what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm sure if I went, I'm sure that it's very that. I mean, I've not really seen. I've seen a gun in a holster, but I haven't like seen a gun like get pulled out on me.
Well, no, I'm not saying it got pulled out on you because it
No,
wasn't
no,
pulled
no,
out
no.
on me
I'm
either.
saying like for instance, if somebody like pulled a gun on me, yeah, I know that would be enough for me.
Correct. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that level of trauma would be different because, depending on what the context is, I just saw the gun. That's it. I saw
I
it
mean,
and I went, you know what I mean? I wasn't expecting to see a gun, but I just went head over heels in my head and everything else, which was pretty traumatic for me. But I'm saying, not that someone had, let's just say one of your friends, you was sitting down beside them and he showed you his gun, like, hey, this is what I got, yo, this is what I'm holding. And you'll be sitting there looking like, well, first of all, I don't know why you got a gun, but I know what a gun looked like, so you ain't scaring nobody. You get what I'm saying? Because you've already, you know what I'm saying? You kind of get where I'm coming from,
I
right?
mean, I don't think the. I'm not. I do get what you're saying. That like, yeah, like you not being you understanding what like a gun is and what that's being used for. Of course, you know. I don't I mean, in the context of when guns were around, I guess me, I mean, Michael, I don't think really got to like get a good look at any of that as a kid.
Hmm.
But I knew what you guys had and everything. But it's like, but it's not like your guns was out or like
No, of course not.
or
There
I
was
knew where they were.
Yeah, of course. But I'm using this example, which means you probably going a little too far. But this example I'm using is like everyone's trauma is different. So everybody's response to trauma, everything is different. Trauma is definitely an intense a response to an intense stressful event or situation. So we all know that trauma can happen at any age and it has a lasting effect on people. It can be physically and it can affect your mental and your physical and mental well-being. We all know that. And then when we start thinking about trauma, trauma does not discriminate. Okay, doesn't matter who you
Mhm.
are or anything of that nature. When we also talk about trauma, we think about the overwhelming feeling that you get. And it results in pretty much shock, denial, or body changes, mind and behavior changes. So all these things start to, you know, make some differences and change. And a lot of times when we thinking about trauma, if you say trauma, especially in my world, mental health, when you say trauma, people automatically think physical or sexual assault or physical assault. Those are, yes, traumas. And like I always tell people, abuse, of course, but sometimes we don't realize that trauma can also happen from verbal abuse. It can still happen from financial abuse. It can still happen from, just the level of manipulation that someone will bring upon you that, cause emotional abuse. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of times when we're talking about trauma, there are just so many different things that goes on in the world of trauma. And then also thinking about the complexity of it. Complex trauma is like things that are happening and it's a cumulative impact on a person. So basically when we're talking about childhood trauma, a lot of times that's when there's just a lot going on in a child's world. And a lot of times their early experiences, the trauma do leave a deep imprint on that individual's worldview, their sense of self, and relationships later in life. So we start to see where that trauma goes on with folks, you know? So,
Mhm.
with that being said, Tremaine, I know, like I said, I know we don't talk about trauma that much, but when we do talk about trauma, I think everybody don't think that deeply, as in, what could be traumatic for me might not be traumatic for the next person. What do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of times when we're thinking about the acuteness of a trauma, when we're talking about acute trauma, that's something, the symptoms may last for, 3 days to about 1 month, but that's when something's going on. That could be something as simple as childbirth. That can be an acute trauma, you know? Terrorism could be something that, creates a acute trauma. Oh, a natural disaster, a hurricane, tornado, earthquake and things of that nature. Those are things that can definitely create, acute traumas as well. And then chronic trauma, we're talking about prolonged, ongoing, continued exposure to a level of distress. A lot of times, what we don't realize is the chronic trauma, what can fall under chronic trauma is abuse. A lot of times, when our children are dealing with bullying in school, bullying falls under a, chronic trauma. And domestic violence is another one that falls under chronic trauma, Tremaine, any thoughts on those? Because I know we definitely deal with a lot of bullying, and we hear a lot of students that are bullied in school. And I don't think people realize that that could be something that could go on a long way with our kids.
It is something that goes a long way,
Hmm.
and there's kind of a there needs to be more of a dialogue of opening up for those things.
Oh, yeah. I think talking about trauma is a big thing, but I think a lot of times people, stare away from it. This is what I wish, of course, in my childhood. I wish people talk more about. Um, I wish they gave us more explanations for stuff. So if you told me don't touch the stove, uh, why is it going to burn me? Like, you should tell me because it's going to burn you and it's really hot. You know what I mean? But it was just don't touch the stove. Don't do that. You know what I mean? And so I think trauma is one of those words that people look at like that. Like, we can mention trauma, but I'm not going to tell nobody really what trauma is. You know what I'm saying? You'll experience it on your own. Oh no. What are your thoughts, Tremaine, with that?
I mean, everybody has their own, way in which they're brought up,
Yeah.
and yes, the adults in your life could be more forthcoming with everything, but some kids are hard to rein in like that. Like you can tell a kid, "Oh, it's hot; it'll burn you." Some kids will, some kids will do what they. Some kids will touch the stove anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And that's fine. If it's
Yeah,
natural
like I was
consequences,
about to say,
they'll deal
then
with the
you're over the
natural
sink
consequences.
watching, trying to thing their hand.
Yeah, natural consequences, exactly. And I tell people a lot of time when we're looking at vicarious trauma, that's the trauma that from hearing your story, I'm dealing with that trauma. You know what I'm saying? I'm dealing with that level of trauma because I'm listening to your story, and your story is definitely giving us a vibe here. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So yeah. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go to a commercial break and we'll be back after these messages. We got options with the doctor and son, a family conversation discussing mental health and wellness topics weekly with a variety of special guest appearances. Join us every Friday morning at 8:30 a.m. on www.wdrbmedia.com. And we're back with We Got Options with the doctor and son. So, Tremaine, one of the things I wanted to continue to talk about here is still talking about understanding trauma. When we consider talking about trauma, one of the big things I'm going to see, I see here as I was doing my research that I wanted to talk about is some of the mental and physical effects of trauma. So a lot of times we don't realize that trauma is, a buildup of that stress, of course, and it does affect us in many areas of our life. And I think people don't realize that it's not limited just to, oh, my emotions. No, it can affect us socially, it can affect us physically, it could affect us, I mean, just in a whole lot of different ways. Mentally, it's definitely going to, cause some concerns for us. And a lot of times, due to the body being under extreme stress, the body and the mind becomes overwhelmed, and that can also cause some engagement in our nervous system, which is kind of like that fight, flight, or freeze response. And that, when we're freeze, we're kind of paralyzed and can't move. Flight, we got to get out of there. Fight, we coming out punching or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But a lot of times we don't think about that, but our body being in that state is a lot of sometimes, what could cause a lot of strain on our heart, which is not good for our health, a lot of strain, of course, on our brain and things of that nature. But I think people realize that basically, don't realize is that our nervous system is definitely overwhelmed when we dealing with trauma. Is that something big for you, Tremaine? You've heard that before?
I mean, I've heard that. I mean, I've heard that before, and it all makes sense. Because I
Mm,
mean, you know, when I mean, you're experiencing trauma based off, memories and certain things, and
mm-hmm.
dep- depending on how, you know, the older we get, the more I think the more exaggerated it can become.
You're right. Definitely dealing with post traumatic stress disorder when they're dealing with the flashbacks and the nightmares. Yeah. The hypervigilance,
Yeah,
um, things that trigger, yeah, this
yeah.
is
I'm about to say you can have dreams about it. It can make you wake up in a cold sweat.
yes, absolutely. And a lot of times people don't realize, like you said, having dreams about it is going to cause you to have some sleep problems. You know what I'm saying? You're going to have some issues. Some people don't realize the stress is bothering them so much on a physical level that they end up having chronic pain. You know what I mean? Because
Hmm.
there are body based effects also that we call, that we basically they're known as the somatic symptoms. Basically, chronic pain, sleep problems, chest pains, headaches. So a lot of those things are areas to consider. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
I would say this: one of the things that we need to be mindful of is that a lot of things that cause trauma, those are things that sometimes are are just things that we're not even expecting sometimes, or just everyday things like our medical health can cause us we can have some medical trauma. Like I tell people, sometimes a car accident can cause the fact of having a medical trauma. You have to go to the hospital and have something done immediately. There's also, of course, sexual trauma out there. There's family trauma out there. That's a big one. There's also traumatic grief when you all of a sudden lose the family member. So there are different things that come up that is considered trauma. Intimate partner violence. Of course, domestic violence, childhood neglect, things like that. And those are things that do put that extreme amount of stress on us as people. So yeah.
hmm
So when we're talking about stressful conditions and we're talking about trauma, some of the mental health conditions that are associated with trauma, like Tremaine, you mentioned just now, well, you mentioned some of the nightmares and stuff, and I was like, yeah, sounding like post traumatic stress disorder. I learned that post traumatic stress disorder, of course, that's associated with trauma. Dissociative disorder is associated with trauma also. When an individual is going to disassociate, or they disassociate from, whatever the trauma, whatever happened to them. Borderline personality disorder, depression and anxiety, all of them are associated when we're talking about trauma. And then on the heels of talking about healing from trauma, Tremaine, there are a lot of ways that people can consider healing from trauma. But I think on the clinical side, on my side, I definitely know that a lot of people go into cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. A lot of people go into prolonged exposure therapy, and a lot of people do the EMDR, which is the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. So a lot of people do a lot of those things, but I want to talk about some natural ways that we can think of, Tremaine, for a person wanting to heal from some of their trauma. What are some thoughts that you have in your head? Or some basic things that you think?
Um, well, in terms of healing from your trauma, I mean, talking about it, for one, having somebody that understands what you're going through. I
Mhm.
mean, mostly talking to a professional to have an opinion of it, because I mean, by ourselves, we can only do so much.
And I'm going to say this, of course, as a Black clinician, as a Black individual, sometimes having that conversation with someone who can relate to it. So even having a competent person, professional that you can speak to in regards to that experience, you know what I mean? Or, you know what I'm saying? So that they can understand, why you had that reaction. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And some of the stuff to go along with it. What about some creative writing and journaling and things like that?
Uh, I guess those would be fun too.
Any other
I
ones
mean,
you can
anything.
think of?
I mean, anything that could help you get through it. Any type of. I mean, speaking on it, number one, I think is pretty much a very crucial and first step to it, because in talking about it, you're able to kind of some have someone to literally bounce their perspective off of. You can maybe bring it back down to reality, because I think if you leave something in your mind long enough, it can fester and be over exaggerate. We can over exaggerate our experiences.
Oh, absolutely. I get that. That totally makes sense. One of the things that I realized when I was actually doing this research, there was a statement that was made that a lot of individuals that act out in theater actually heal from their trauma through their acting. I was like, wow, that's interesting. But I can see that and I can resonate with that. What about you?
I could see that too.
Yeah.
I mean, if a character really resonates with you, that's how we get very good performances.
Exactly. And that's why I thought about it like that when I read it. I said, first I said, And then I said, well, wait a minute, let me think about it. We have some actors out there and actresses out there that can, act in such a large range. You know what I mean? That I'm like,
Mhm.
so that's probably some to do with it. And it's not that they're actually experiencing trauma, but they're actually, when they get into that role, they're able to feel it to a point where they can just act it out and be just fine with it. You know what I mean? And really heal from it and get some probably some resolution or some comfort with themselves. You know what I mean? So that was something very interesting to me. And a lot of the expressive writing part of it, you can improve your resilience to trauma when you're doing some of those things, and trying to have some different activities and things of that in your life. But yeah, I definitely agree with you when it comes down to really focusing on, understanding what trauma is and really, taking it, stabilizing yourself, making sure that you really are able to, figure out what's going on, what's there for you, processing through what happened and everything else, and then working on a level of reprogramming. That's always something to consider. And that's one of the Herman's model for trauma recovery that I've learned about as well. So, definitely having individuals in your life that could be a trauma informed care person. That's a big thing. But with that, Tremaine, we're going to go ahead and run to a commercial break, and we'll be back after these messages. Insightful Options PLLC, providing counseling, consultation, and DWI services in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Contact us at www.insightful-options.com 704-492-1105. And we're back. So we are going to wrap up our show today, and we're talking about trauma. With understanding trauma being the title that we're kind of going with, we just wanted to brief the conversation of it because, to be honest with you, right now in our current, environment, society, everyone's talking about mental health, and everyone's talking about all these buzzwords that actually, pertains to mental health and everything. And I just really felt like understanding or having the awareness of trauma is an important thing right now. Right now, I'm just going to jump into the informed care. When we're talking about trauma informed care, we're looking at three elements, pretty much to realize the prevalence of trauma. And basically, this takes into account that most individuals have experienced some form of trauma in one way or another throughout their life. Okay. Uh, Two is to recognize how trauma affects all individuals. This means noticing how trauma impacts each level of an organization and the system as a whole. So, when we're talking about that, if we're talking about a family unit, how does that, what I'm saying, how does the trauma affect and it affects everyone in the home. It affects everyone. Everyone was exposed to it, experienced something, or whatever the case may be, whether they felt it on the front end, in the middle of it, or at the end of it. They're feeling something. So everyone deals with it. It affects the whole unit, or the whole system or organization. And then when we talk about the response by putting this knowledge into practice, this is just realizing that the reference to addressing organizational policies, and this right here is a little bit more formal, organizational policies that may be re-traumatizing. So if we know something happened, what I'm saying, in this situation, whether it's a home, whether it's an organization, whether it's, wherever it is located, whatever system is located in, we need to be able to address the fact that it happened. And the reason why we want to address it is so that we do not cause re-traumatization. We do not want the re-traumatizing to continue on in our family structure, for generation after generation, in our workplace or organizations or whatever the case may be. So hearing that whole informed that traumatic informed care, Tremaine, where does that put you right now with, like I said earlier, these are buzzwords right now in our community. This is what's happening in society. Everyone's talking about mental health awareness and, trauma informed care and, understanding what things are. So what are your thoughts there?
I mean, it's things that necessarily always have plagued us as people, but the idea of, you know, just getting over it is not a good answer anymore.
Mm.
Because, as in all things, if you don't handle trauma and things of that nature, things tend to appear in other ways. They tend to manifest in different ways in your life in general if you don't deal with your problems.
Oh, that's very true. I totally understand. Yes. And as a therapist, I can say, yes, that's sometimes a lot of the things that, come up in many of the sessions when I'm working with individuals that, that level of trauma is manifesting in different ways. And they're seeing a whole lot of different things that they're just like, well, this is out of character. Well, we never addressed whatever it was that caused that level of this. You get what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So yeah, we've seen a lot of that. So I'm glad you brought that to light and kind of shared that also, because that gives us, you know, good information and good thoughts. Me being definitely a professional in the field, and you kind of being a layperson in the field, and kind of getting both perspectives. So again, Tremaine, as always, I thank you for giving me your input. You are always giving some um great philosophical answers a lot of times, though very well thought out.
I try my best.
All right, all right. Well, we're going to thank our audience. Thanks so much for joining us again on this Friday at 8:30 a.m. with We Got Options with the Doctor and Son. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a great one. And hello, this is Dr. Latasha McElwain with the Green McElwain Foundation. I have teamed up with osjourneys.com for a wonderful health and wellness retreat in Belize. Our dates for the retreat will be May 21st through May 27th of 2024. There's going to be luxury accommodations. There's going to be a whole lot of time to be able to reflect on things and finding your inner self. The health and wellness retreat will focus on just breathing, just being able to breathe. That is the mantra or the outcome of many individuals nowadays looking for a mind, body, and soul rejuvenation, restoration, and retreat. Come join us. You can get more information at osjourneys.com for travel and for the retreat in Belize. Come join us.